We are looking back at the stories that made headlines in our area in 2009. Don Alhart takes a look back at what made headlines this past year in January.
In the bitter cold of January, a pilot named Sully brought us a miracle to warm our hearts.
We've had a miracle on 34th Street. I believe now we've had a miracle in the Hudson.
The governor was no stranger to January headlines. After courting a Kennedy, he chooses Kirsten Gillibrand to replace a Clinton as our senator. That Clinton, of course, returned to D.C., where an historic presidency begins with record-breaking crowds on hand. Back home, the crowds gathered in unemployment lines. Kodak slashes some 1,300 jobs locally. Xerox cuts 275. Even the city's school district considers hundreds of job cuts as the recession deepens. 4 alarms were sounded for this fire in Greece. Also in Greece, it's an off-duty cop that rushes to the aid of 2 spa employees. The women were being robbed. The officer opened fire, wounding one, killing another.
I call this nothing more than an assassination attempt. This officer was basically sniped walking to his car.
On the last day of January, one of Rochester's finest becomes known to us all. Officer Anthony DePonzio is shot while on patrol. A teenager would later be arrested and convicted. Yes, all that happened in January 2009, a year, like many others, defined by its headlines.
Before we bring in the new year, we're taking a look back at this past year. A fatal plane crash near Buffalo, the Valentine's Day massacre, and a new owner for a local brewery. Here's Don Alhart with a look back at the stories that made headlines in February 2009.
A frigid February night, and the unthinkable happens. Continental Flight 3407 plummets to the ground in Clarence Center, just outside Buffalo. 49 on board, and 1 on the ground die instantly. Witnesses live with visions they'll never forget.
But it's nothing that anybody wants to see. You're just completely helpless. You don't want to see it.
Days later, a Valentine's Day rampage spans 2 counties. A recently fired nurse, Frank Garcia, is accused of 4 murders. In Brockport, a former co-worker and a Good Samaritan are shot dead. In Canandaigua, a family is held hostage, ending in the execution-style murders of Kimberly and Christopher Glatz. The community wraps its arms around those that survive.
The children, those children, they're going to need so much more than we'll ever be able to give them.
Look at this bill.
On the national stage, a stimulus package.
I don't want to pretend that today marks the end of our economic problems.
Hundreds of billions of dollars for roads, infrastructure, and, yes, political favors.
I think this is the greatest pig roast in history.
What goes well with pork? Beer, of course. And as February wound down, a new owner emerged for Rochester's High Falls Brewery.
I love beer. Who doesn't like beer?
Could not have said it better myself.
A Greece cop gets hard time, and the governor has a hard time balancing the state's budget. As 13WHAM's Sean Carroll tells us, those were just 2 of the headlines that highlight the month of March 2009.
An iPod tax, a sugar tax, a haircut tax? All ways to balance a budget, says the governor, but he backed off this in March on a trip to Rochester, no less, drumming up support while his approval ratings dipped below, yes, even that guy, the one he replaced a year prior.
New York State may finally join 35 other states in
Another statewide battle wages on in the Finger Lakes, buying wine at a Wegmans. Here's another thing folks didn't see happening. Yes, the Buffalo Bills signed T.O. Excitement ensues, and for a moment, the football world focuses in on Orchard Park.
I'm used to it, everywhere that I've been, and gone, it's always been that type of reception.
In the Hall of Justice, a Grease cop is found guilty. Nick Joseph will serve state prison time for his role in a hit and run the year before. And in Geneseo, a SUNY sophomore is found dead at an unsanctioned fraternity. A crackdown on hazing and binge drinking begins. Armin Partamian was just 19 years old. His blood alcohol level, perhaps 8 times the legal limit. Sean Carroll, 13WHAM News.
Well, a local teen missing in Myrtle Beach. At last, a new president at MCC, and CSX rail cars that did nothing.
That's right, yes. All the stories that made headlines in 2009, of April 2009. 13WHAM's Don Alhart continues our look back.
Just unbelievable.
April began with our attention turned to a horrific situation in the southern tier. A gunman storms a civic association, opening fire on a class of immigrants studying for citizenship. 13 are dead. The gunman ends by taking his own life.
This is a very serious fire.
In Rochester, a South Union Street fire rings to 3 alarms, but all escape unharmed. In Lima, speeding plays a role in a one-car crash that kills 2 young men, well known and liked in this small community. It took quite some time and some political patience, but MCC at last has found a new president in Dr. Ann Kresh.
This is a transient crowd down here. It's very easy to blend in.
A 17-year-old Chi-Li teen goes missing in Myrtle Beach. Away on spring break with friends, Brittanee Drexel vanishes without a trace. Search parties spread out. The national media focuses in, and reported sightings offer continued hope and disappointment.
I can't go on false hope. I can't. I have to know that it's my daughter.
And back in Greece, it was something that did nothing for too long that annoyed neighbors.
It was Saturday, I believe it was April 4th. They actually backed in here, and as you can see, haven't left since.
The boxcars would stay for many more weeks. CSX blamed the economy.
I can understand everybody having problems right now with the economy, but this isn't going to, it might solve their problem, but it's giving me a problem.
A sad ending to the search for a missing woman in Irondequoit, a new CEO at Xerox, and a local billionaire who says he's moving south. Those were all stories that helped define May of 2009. We take a look back tonight. The Canandaigua community was shocked by the death of a student in a school bathroom, a gun in the school, disturbing clues on a home computer, suicide, and school safety all became topics of discussion in the town.
So I'm feeling very strong and very encouraged.
On a road along Canandaigua Lake, the U of R Medical Center's top doc, Brad Burke, was severely injured in a bike accident. Months later, Dr. Burke is still recovering, and he's back on the job.
Remember that today's ceremony is a commencement, not an ending, but a beginning.
At Xerox, an ending and a beginning, Ursula Burns replaced Ann Mulcahy as CEO. And speaking of moving on,
people have the freedom and the flexibility to move. And they've been moving. And we know it.
Local billionaire Tom Golisano said he's moving south to Florida, and he did. The Rochester native was making a statement about New York's taxes and politics. In Irondequoit, 3 months after being reported missing, the body of 85-year-old Bernice Ferentz was found in her car in the water. Police say it was an accident.
They're paying their taxes here. They are helping local economy right on down the line.
You're not part of our future, some were told, and even competitors in this cutthroat industry felt the pain.
Yes, there's competition, but it also is a bit of a fraternity, and the fraternity's taking a little hit today.
7:19 now. Our look back at 2009 includes a drug dealer roundup in Canandaigua, the feds indicting a Robitrad worker, and a potential coup in Albany. Here again is Doug Embledge with the headlines that topped our newscasts in June.
June began with General Motors declaring bankruptcy. The U.S. government and taxpayers took over a 60% stake in GM as plants shut down and brands became extinct. A week later, in Albany.
What happened to the handshake? What happened to somebody's word?
2 Democrats defected to the right in a coup that crippled the state Senate for more than a month. In Monroe County, federal charges were filed against a former county supervisor who led a group of union workers accused of bilking taxpayers out of tens of thousands of dollars.
So there was no reason for this action that have taken place.
In Irondequoit, a county DOT worker was critically injured when a teenager driving on a suspended license drove into the back of this truck while a crew was striping a newly paved road. And in Canandaigua,
don't come to our town if you think we're going to turn a blind eye to it.
A 6-month-long investigation led to the arrests of 40 suspected drug dealers. Operation Chosen Spot encouraged criminals to choose another spot. Doug Embledge, 13 WHAM News.
An explosion in Livingston County, cash for clunkers, and an end to the Senate fiasco and a stalemate in Albany. As 13WHAM's Sean Carroll tells us, these headlines and the death of Renaissance Square made for an eventful and busy July.
Believe it or not, the first criminal conviction in 20 years of a known John for prostitution charges sparks a Lyle Avenue crackdown that continues to this day. It was just before daybreak that a house-rattling explosion at this chemical plant in Livingston County woke neighbors. Greece police continue to make news. One's arrest is the first to stem from an internal investigation. Another ex-Greece cop, Gary Pignato, is sentenced to prison. In Albany, a month-long Senate stalemate grinds to a halt. A lieutenant governor is named, and Democrats regain a fragile majority.
I need the attention of all my salespeople and the customers that are currently in the showroom.
Cash for clunkers spurs new car sales, but in days, a problem promptly halts the program. You see, Cash for clunkers ran out of cash.
Again, I apologize, but I don't run the government.
Speaking of government, various local ones sparred when the $250 million Renaissance Square neared a vital deadline. The largest public project in our community's history dies at the steps of City Hall, but assigning blame isn't that easy.
Let me be clear, Renaissance Square is dead.
I never received a phone call that this was dead.
But in Rochester, there's always Wegmans. And as July winds down, news of a massive expansion at the city's last remaining store begins to surface. One shop refused to sell, so Wegmans plans to build around it. Norma Holland, 13WHAM News.
We are continuing our look now at the top local stories of 2009. In August, a county executive went toe-to-toe with the governor over school supplies. Healthcare reform was literally the talk of the town, and two Bills legends were at the Football Hall of Fame.
13WHAM's Sean Carroll looks back at those stories.
A cop, a nurse, and a mom are among those making news in courtrooms this past August. The cop is Greece's former police chief, paraded to court in handcuffs under arrest for a felony charge. The nurse is Frank Garcia, convicted of 2 murders and kidnapping in Ontario County, all part of a gruesome Valentine's Day crime spree. The mom is Nicole Allen, arrested and charged for her own daughter's death in this 2nd Street house fire. And this fire in Irondequoit turns deadly as well. An elderly woman fails to escape the mansion before firefighters arrive.
These guys have the reputation of writing laws that they exempt themselves from and cram down our throats.
A national issue is given a local stage. Healthcare reform spurs town hall meetings and passionate debates from all sides. Speaking of politics, Monroe County's executive Maggie Brooks takes on Governor Patterson for a controversial school supplies handout program.
I don't think anybody is saying that giving families money for school supplies is not a worthy cause. But when you hand out cash with no strings attached, you open it up, you open up the program to widespread abuse.
And in sports, 2 stories make headlines. After back-and-forth negotiations, the LPGA announces a deal to stay in Rochester. And in Canton, Ohio, it was a Buffalo weekend. The league's all-time sack leader, Bruce Smith, and the team's owner for 5 decades and counting, Ralph Wilson, at last, they don the yellow blazers, reserved for an elite group, Hall of Famers. Sean Carroll, 13WHAM News.
The president remarks on New York politics. A violent night in Rochester leaves teenage victims behind. And the disappearance of a Yale student with Rochester ties attracts the attention of the nation. As 13WHAM's Ginny Ryan explains, those were some of the headlines that comprised September of 2009.
September began with 2 life sentences for Valentine's Day murderer Frank Garcia. His sentence also brought up renewed talk of the death penalty.
If this does not classify or qualify as the worst of the worst, no case does.
In Rochester, 3 teens were gunned down on a city street. 12-year-old Camry McKnight died, and the community asked for answers.
No justice, no peace.
A Churchville Chili alum died fighting in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Nicole Allen left behind a wife and 3 children. In politics, reports surfaced that President Obama was trying to convince the governor not to run for re-election. True or false, the governor remains a candidate. At Yale, a medical school student's disappearance sparked national media attention. Annie Lay would be found dead on the day her wedding was scheduled. And a University of Rochester community that knew her as an undergrad felt the loss as well.
It's disappointing to me. It's disappointing, I think, to the kids.
Fall sports began shorter schedules for many local athletes, cost-cutting measures from Section 5 in the midst of a recession.
Find the defendant guilty.
And 15-year-old Taekwon Rivera was convicted for the attempted murder of Rochester police officer Anthony DiPonzio. DiPonzio and his family found support amid a sea of blue in the courtroom. Ginny Ryan, 13 WHAM News.
In October of this year, an attack on a football referee and the sentencing of a teen for the shooting of a Rochester police officer topped news headlines. Here's Ginny Ryan with our look back at that month. A month from Election Day, former Monroe County Executive Jim Smith was charged with official misconduct. He's the highest-ranking official to be charged in the so-called Robitrad scandal, involving possible wrongdoing of county trade workers.
What do you tell you? Back up! Go!
Home video captured this clash between Rochester police and war protesters, most of them high school students. Protesters decried police actions, saying they went too far. The mayor and city council agreed to look into complaints.
So please don't hurt me. I'm pregnant. Please, you're going to kill my baby.
The husband of a woman attacked, leaving her job in Henrietta, shared their story. She was carjacked, assaulted, and left to die, but survived. At the time, she was 9 weeks pregnant, and the baby was not hurt. 2 men are facing charges. 15-year-old Taekwon Rivera was sentenced to 10 years for the shooting of Rochester police officer Anthony DiPonzio. In emotional sentencing, the courtroom packed with fellow officers and DiPonzio's family. The sentence has spurred a call for changes in state law to allow longer sentences for serious juvenile crimes. And another young man from Rochester was convicted of murder. 18-year-old Jaquan Clark was found guilty of killing 3 people the day before Christmas. Victims' families called it a reign of terror and said the verdict was bittersweet. Ginny Ryan, 13 WHAM News.
And now we continue with our look at what made news in '09. A devastating fire and concerns about the swine flu topped the news in November. 13 WHAM's Ginny Ryan has our look back.
A child's death in Ontario County motivated many to stand in line for a swine flu shot. Monroe County followed with public clinics at 5 sites on 2 days. There was anger and frustration as some waited as long as 6 hours in a cold rain to get their shot. Changes were made and the line shortened. Murder case part 2, Frank Garcia, convicted of killing 3 people in Monroe County. The killings happened on Valentine's Day outside Lakeside Hospital, where Garcia was fired as a nurse. Garcia was previously convicted of killing a Canandaigua couple that same day. Mammogram confusion and controversy began. A government panel recommended and later withdrew advice that women wait until 50 to begin breast cancer screening.
I looked at my husband who was watching it with me and I said, my gosh, I'd be dead if I had waited till 50 for a mammogram.
Never too soon to think about golf. Wegmans announced it would sponsor the LPGA Championship in June at Locust Hill.
This is one of the most significant fires that I've been in command of or been at in my whole career.
They will be talking about this fire at the Family Dollar on North Clinton in Rochester for some time. Arson is suspected. Earlier, a smaller fire broke out at a Family Dollar just 4 miles away. The fire quickly spread to several stores, damaging many and leaving people without a place to shop. Sarah Palin made a stop in town, and people lined up 24 hours in advance to see the former vice presidential candidate during a 2-hour book signing. And many Bills fans gave thanks when the team fired head coach Dick Duran. 7 losses in 8 games, just too much. The team tapped defensive coordinator Perry Fuel as interim coach. He's hoping to win the job. Fans just want to win some games.
Deputies say a Parenton man made a call to 911 from Mendon Ponds Park to report that he'd killed his wife. Timothy Wells was an RIT professor. Now he's an accused murderer charged with strangling Christine Sevilla in their home, then leaving her body in a car in the park. Sevilla was a noted photographer and environmental activist. 2 Rochester police officers were shot while responding to an apartment building on Driving Park. Daniel Brochu and Luca Martini are recovering at home now. and the alleged shooter, Nixon Elian, and another man are in jail. The area got its first taste of winter this month when a lake-effect storm dumped up to a foot of snow south and west of Rochester. A Grease man was acquitted of manslaughter for the April shooting of 17-year-old Christopher Cervini. Roderick Scott confronted Cervini for breaking into cars and said the teen charged him, forcing him to shoot in self-defense.
He was viciously gunned down in cold blood.
I still have my regrets for the Cervini family. I mean, it's still an unfortunate situation for them.
A fire in a North Goodman Street apartment killed a man and two of his daughters. Benjamin Butler had just moved there and had plans to make Christmas as special as possible for his children this year. 2 Greece police officers shot and killed a man who they say pointed a gun in their direction. 62-year-old Paul Miller had been arrested for DWI hours earlier, then allegedly grabbed a gun and walked with it in his neighborhood. Police say he did not follow repeated orders to drop the weapon. The man at the center of a scheme to defraud Monroe County and taxpayers of upwards of $1 million pleaded guilty to mail fraud this month. Robert Marone will also tell what he knows to the FBI and Sheriff's Department. His sentencing has not happened yet. A 6-year-old boy reminded all of us about the meaning of the season in December. Inspired by the work of former basketball star Manute Bol, Josiah Bertu is gathering school supplies to send to children in Sudan. Children he has never met. Doug Embledge, 13 WHAM News.